Saturday, July 17th, 2010. I'm David Jackson. This is the studios at KRE in Berkeley, and I'm sitting across from your Duke, Dave Sholin. And Dave, it's great to have you here today. And we want to just actually start at the beginning and work our way through as much as we can through the life and times, both in and out of radio with you. First of all, you grew up here in the Bay Area on the peninsula.
Grew up in Redwood City as a great grammar school time. That was the era of KOBY. Started a little bit of KEWB, KYA, and all of that. But the first early on, until we got to Redwood City, when I started playing with records as a kid, I realized these little golden records, the little kiddie records, which they made to get us into music, and it sure worked. We were out by near the Cliff House. Right by Richmond District, and so Playland. I spent a lot of time there, and then went to Redwood City, and that's where I started doing the radio in my little bedroom.
It seems like that was the gateway drug for so many of us back during that era, where you could get yourself a little transmitter kit, or even if you didn't have that, you just spin the records and try to talk up the record. So
that's for sure.
Even at a young age.
My dad got me a little. He actually built this little thing, and an amplifier, a little board, my mic. So if I got called to dinner, we'd have to break for a newscast. Time for the news. Okay, we'll be back. I wanted to be, and realized, didn't know this years later. Gary Mora and I didn't know each other. We were just miles apart in Redwood City, just at the same time.
I'm sure it's
all business.
At various points throughout the entire landscape of America, there were kids doing the same thing. At what point, though, in your life did you decide, this might be something I want to do? Was it young? Was it as a kid?
Very young. I mean, I was probably, I'm thinking 4th grade, 9, 10, 4th, 5th grade. I mean, this was it. And, then my dad took me to Kobe. That was the big station. They were on Mason Street. We went to see this, walked up these steps and saw the jock on the air, and that was it. I was mesmerized. He didn't understand what the heck I was doing. He goes, "What are you looking at?" I said, I could be here for hours. And it was just seeing everything going on, and news people. It was tremendous. And then I'd go down, my buddy and I used to go to KYA early in the Saturday mornings to see Gene Nelson, see the Emperor do his thing, and Twistin' Ralph would let us in. He'd throw us the keys, and we'd go up and go through all the 45s that they were getting rid of, so we'd walk away with those. And
that'd be the legendary number 1 Knob Hill Circle.
It was Knob Hill Circle. Absolutely, it was just one of those great periods of time. There was so much music, and radio was. Every one of these people on the air were just bigger than life. That's for sure.
At what point did it? Was there a move from the dream to actually moving it into reality? School or?
Yeah, school. I would think that would be it. I started at College of San Mateo, where you're on the radio. That was the biggest thing. People could actually hear you. Folks could turn on the radio and hear. We were playing. We were playing all kinds of stuff. Dan Odom, of course, was one of my instructors. Doug Montgomery was there, and we would do these shows. But Dan had a. I was pushing to do top 40. I wanted to play the hits. So we could push the envelope a little bit, but only slightly. So it went from that in a few years at College of San Mateo to San Francisco State, where they had, I had met Ben Fong Torres, a lot of my friends at Ron Fell, people that I've known for years and years. And there, they were doing top 40. The station could only be heard like 2 blocks away. It wasn't the same signal as KCSM, but we were, basically fashioning ourselves like a mini KFRC. We had jingles, play the hits, do the whole thing. It was great. It was, we had engineers, the jocks would go on the air. It was just, it was a lot of fun. And I got to program the station. And then after State, I saw a posting at San Francisco State, KLIV, San Jose, looking for someone to be on the air. So, I didn't know at the time. I think they had already auditioned like 10 different people, because the way it worked at that point was they would put you on from midnight to 6, but you'd only, I think you'd do an hour. That's how you started. You'd do like an hour. You'd show up at the station, and from 2 to 3 they would tape what you're doing. And in my case, it was John Betancourt was on the air from midnight to 6. So John he was a big man with a beard, and he kept walking out in the middle of, here we are in San Jose in the middle of the night. You're the guy? Now John had already seen like 10 of these people come through.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's the next guy. So I come in and you record that 1 hour, and John just throws you to the wolves. Okay, here's the stack of music. Here you go. You're on in like 5 minutes. Oh, okay, what do I do? Well, here it is. Just do your thing. So we recorded that, and then I said, if we like you, they'll call you back, and you'll do a full 6 hours and record the last hour. And Ross McGowan, I think, they called him the chief announcer. He and Scott St. James, both Ross and Scott. And they called me back. I got this phone call a few days later. We want you to come back in. So I did that second shift, and from there I became like their part-timer that moved into full-time, and was able to, with the help of Bob Keeve, Scott St. James, Ross, John Betancourt, a lot of my friends, John McLeod, they all helped me to move to that next level.
And you talk, at that time, you think now San Jose is one of the largest cities in America, but back then you were in the middle of an orchard, basically. And
absolutely.
San Jose was still considered, it wasn't the capital of Silicon Valley, but
yeah.
That was a very vibrant, mid-major radio station at the time, with some really tremendous talent.
Tremendous, yeah, absolutely. And, it was, under that umbrella of San Francisco, which is always the good thing, because hopefully someone will hear you there. And that's pretty much what happened. We had great, and the numbers were huge. KLIV had big numbers, and that really helped propel me to get an offer from KFRC. So, and that was definitely due to Paul Drew and Michael Spears, people that were involved with the KFRC at the time. And they saw the numbers. They saw KFRC being beaten in San Jose. What's going on? So that opened up the door for me to get to the dream of being at KFRC, and I was able to do that.
Before we get to the big leagues, though, you ended up getting your first-class radio license at some point along the way, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you go, and what'd you do, and how'd you get it?
Right out of college, right out of SF State. A number of people had gone through the same school, so I've kind of like
And which school was it?
And that was William B. Ogden School of Radio, which was still today. I mean, now there's I think there's a website for memories of people that have gone to Ogden's, and it was quite an experience. It was like being at boot camp for a Marine. I mean, Bill Ogden was a guy that had seen everybody come through, and he told you right away, he goes, I don't like jocks, I don't like them, but you guys have a right to get this license. And I was one of the people in my class was Shotgun Tom Kelly, who does afternoons now at KEarth. And we used to just play radio. This is a little inside, actually in bathrooms. I don't know, get too detailed about this, but he'd be in one stall and I'd be another, and he would be the newsman and I'd be the jock. So we would be coming out of newscasts. Back then it was KHJ doing, and that's the way it is today, July 26th. Yeah, and then we'd have a timpani, and I would be the jock. July 22nd, 1967.
Real Don Steele.
Right, in a bathroom with the echo, it sounded great. So
exactly,
it was a lot of fun.
While in San Jose, was your first programming job as well?
Yeah, San Jose. Right, that was because Rick Carroll was there. Then Rick had left, and Bob Keeve called me in one afternoon and said, listen, you spend all your time sitting around listening to music. I was doing that when Peter Boehm was our music director, the great Peter B. And he says, I know this is what you love. Would you consider you could do music, you'd be on the air? I said, absolutely. So that's the way it kind of opened it up for me, and I had a lot of freedom to, thanks to Bob, to play what I thought was the right library, put on the new music. And KLIV broke a lot of hits, and it was one of the great things when Paul Drew, before he became the national programmer for RKO, was the PD at KFRC, and he would watch San Jose and he would see records breaking out of San Jose. So it kind of really helped me between that. People like Bill Gavin, the Gavin Report, Cal Rudman, they would give the station a lot of press. It was like, here's another song, another record breaking out of San Jose. So KLIV got that attention, which certainly helped me.
You look at those old Norman surveys and see songs that were showing up on those charts a little bit ahead of time, and
we were able to do that. Yeah.
I think the legacy of the radio station. It was a great. I grew up in the lower East Bay, and so we were split. The difference between the KFRC, the KYA, and the KFRC.
You could tell. You knew the difference between both. You could tell the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just,
wow.
It was there was a surfing culture from the kids in the mid '60s.
Oh, sure.
With the concerts for the Beach Boys and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Cara in Santa Clara was a job for you as well.
Cara was just one of those joys. It was one of the great times. Bob Keeve bought the station. I believe it was Bob Podesta had that before as KREP, and changed the call letters to Cara in Santa Clara. We had this vision of it was definitely before people were doing hot ACs or any kind of version of mixing top 40 and AC and doing a little more adult version of top 40. There was no name for it, but that's basically was what we were trying to do. We had a few currents and music that kind of fit, but it was up tempo, but not too hard for an audience that really had nothing on FM at that time. So it was all automated, and we sat in a room, Bob and I and Vinny LaPopola, who was the chief engineer, and people would, we'd just sit there and go, this one fits, this one doesn't, and sometimes we'd have these arguments, and I have to push Bob, or he'd push me the other way, convince me why it would or wouldn't go on, and that's how we came up with our library.
So at this time you're living in San Jose?
Living in San Jose, I had bought one of those condos, those fourplex condos, which I'm glad I had at the time. And then had another home off of Branham Lane. So yeah, I lived in San Jose.
And looking at that time to move into the city, or
yeah, well, at the time that I got to the KFRC, I was still commuting and doing some overnights. Those drives back to San Jose on 280. Thank goodness, there were a couple of moments there where you're pulling off the road. Oops, time to wake up again. Pull into Jack in the Box for a burger, get home, turn on a cartoon, and nod out. That was pretty much the schedule.
What got you from point A, KLIV, to point B, San Francisco?
Yeah, it was oddly enough, and this is kind of interesting, I had an offer to be at KFRC a few years before from Paul Drew when he was actually at the station. And I didn't think I was really ready to be there. He goes, really? He said, no. And I didn't think at the time, it was a weekend thing. It didn't involve any kind of programming, which is really what I wanted to do, or at least music. So I figured I'm going to wait it out. And sure enough, a couple of years later, I got another call. And this time Michael Spears was there, and Paul, Spears says, Paul Drew says, you're the guy, we got to get you. So what is it going to take? And we came up and had some meetings. In fact, we had a dinner. I mean, one of my first dinners was across the street at Sam's, which is still there, Sam's Grill, over off of Bush and Kearney there. And Bobby Ocean was there in a booth, Bobby and Michael Spears. And a few days later, I was going on the air at 2 in the morning. Bo Weaver was doing 10 to 2. And Bo would, I spent some time in the booth with him, and as the seconds ticked away, it got closer and closer to that moment. This is it, and you start to go, oh. And we had engineers. There were you didn't run your board back then, so which thank goodness. I probably would have, it was all, and there were no carts, so it was music being queued up. But I don't think I could have made it. I think the needle would have been. Am I going to cue this up? But hearing that, putting on those that headset and being able to say those call letters for the first time, and just the way, we had the greatest chief engineer of all time, Phil Lurzan, to have that, to hear that station come through, it was just hard to describe what that experience was like. But then you get into a groove, and a few, like 10 minutes later, you're rolling along.
What was the team at that time when you first joined KFRC?
I'm trying to remember. I know Bo Weaver was doing 10 to 2. Certainly Dr. Don Rose, he'd only been there, I believe, about maybe 6 months, maybe a little bit less.
That was about 73 or so?
He got there in 73. And this was the middle of 74, early 74. So he'd only been there maybe 3-4 months. I think he came in the fall. Was it the fall of 73? Yeah. So I got there probably about 3-4 months later. So it was all new. Bobby Ocean, of course, was on. John Mac Flanagan. I don't want to miss anybody. But I know we made some hires after I had got there. Marvelous Mark came on board. Shauna, the first female top 40 DJ in America. And trying to remember else. I think that was... I don't want to forget anybody, but I'm pretty sure... And Chuck came a little bit later. Yeah, Chuck Buell came a little bit later. Rick Shaw was there. But some of these people initially, when I first got there, that was pretty much the staff. Rick came on board later. Rick Shaw came on board. Chuck Buell, those were all later on. But
you're talking about a radio station that had already established itself as the gold standard in top 40 radio in the Bay Area.
Absolutely.
It was the undisputed champion at that time.
Yeah.
It only seemed like it got better from that point on.
Absolutely. And I give, Michael Spears deserves, a lot of credit, as certainly Paul was overseeing everything. The station, when I got there, it kind of moved away from a lot of the R&B. They were trying to get a little bit hipper, and before, and Michael took it right back to the roots and understood what the station, I think, had to be. So it did make it was a shift there, because certainly album radio and KSAN, a lot of these they were huge. So, but the station really couldn't react too much. We had to be who we were, and I think he took it back into the pure top 40 side of things. So.
You also had an industry in transition at the time. You had an AM radio station, the Amazing AM at that time, and you're transitioning into the later part of the 70s when FM started to become more of a challenge for you, and still the station's able to maintain.
Held on, absolutely. It was one of I think the last probably major top 40 on AM in the country, and continued to have, big numbers. And I think it was certainly the music is a lot of it, but I do think the staff and the people that they had hired, the personalities were, a big part of that. So,
in addition to your role on the air, which I don't know if it was a primary role at that time, you're also moving in more into the programming and doing more of a role that way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
well, when Michael hired me, it was my job was music director / air talent. So I was able to, I had a 5-day week. I'd work weekends, but I'd have Wednesday, I believe it was Wednesday and Thursday were my days off. I think it was Thursday or Friday. They shifted them around a little bit. And so that was that was, to me, one of the big things. Being on the air, I loved it, every second of it, but being involved in the programming with Michael and doing music, and he gave me a lot of freedom. I would come in there, I have to fight sometimes to get some things on that he would say, why does this have to be there? We weren't right all the time, but I think if you bat 80 or 85%, you got a pretty good average.
Where did that come from for you, though? Is it just because you'd been listening to music from the time you were a kid, and just it had to have been something that was extrasensory, or you had some kind of you just feel it's like the savant feel for music? You've always had it.
I don't know where that all came from. I believe early on, and this is something we didn't talk about at the beginning when you said, well, I was living in San Francisco and moved to Redwood City. But I was kind of a Rodney Allen Rippey of the time. I loved to perform, and my parents would have a lot of music records around. And for some reason, I just started singing a lot of these standards that came around from the 30s, the 40s. Al Jolson. I would do these little bits. So to see a little 4 or 5-year-old kid doing it was kind of a novelty act. And I did a lot of that. I did a Kilpatrick's bread commercial. I was on Channel 5.
I'll be there.
Yeah, in the early days of TV, a fellow by the name of Wally King.
Oh, the great Wally King.
Wally King had a TV show called Kitty Capers. And there were, so it would be a talent show right there on Van Ness. You'd go to the station, And there were people that really did have talent. I mean, there were kids there that could do a lot of things. My talent was just being able to, get up there and start singing. And I won this first prize. I got like a bull of a watch, and it was kind of like, wow. And singing, I sang in a club oddly enough, on Bush Street. This is hard to believe. It's called the Say When Club. And here's this little white kid in the club of, it was a black club, and it was great. It was really an experience. So I'd be up there singing, and so that was probably, I had a lot of...
There was something there from the very beginning.
Yeah, I got a lot of that. And, as in grammar school, I was one of those guys, I would listen to the radio, and I would love to be able to hear this song, and I would kind of like be a little promotion man in school, telling kids, hey, have you heard this song? This one's going to be a hit. This one's not going to be... And just love that stuff. So it kind of was one of those things early on, and as you grow up, it's one of those things that you just have an affinity for.
Exactly. Before we start moving into other things, this is 2010, and 30 years ago. Is that right? 30 years ago, December.
It will be 30.
December 1980. Guy who'd be turning 70 years old this year.
That's right.
John Lennon.
Yeah.
And probably 3 of the most remarkable hours of interview. I mean, just amazing radio, because you listen back to John Lennon and Yoko Ono and that interview in the Dakota. And would you mind just expounding a little bit on that and how the whole thing came about? John had been basically in exile, raising Sean for his first 5 years.
Yeah,
and decided to get back into music.
Yes, I will tell you before we even start with the whole Lennon story, that I am working on a special that's going to be airing in December in a bunch of places. Kind of like remembrances that I have, that Ron Hummel, who was our producer engineer at the time and is now working for Clear Channel. Lori Kay, our scriptwriter, so we're all going to be involved, and Bert Keane, who was with the record company at the time. We're all going to have our own remembrances and have John as well, pieces of that interview. Rovan, it'll be part. It's going to be music, a lot of things are going to be involved in that. So, but this interview did come about just as you said. John had been out of the business really for 5 years. He stayed at the Dakota raising his son Sean. They both have the same birthday, October the 9th, and that's when John would be turning 70, as you say. So he wanted to get back in. He had this new creative force that took over and came up with this incredible piece of music. Well, I had no idea any of this was happening. David Geffen was someone that I had got to know through just different friends over the years, and I got a call. It was in the summer of 1980, and I was still in L.A. at that time at RKO. David would like to see you at his office. Can you make it up this afternoon? I think it was sometime in July, just about this time of year. So I go up to his office. He was on Sunset, and we sat down, and he takes out Starting Over. I have no idea who. He doesn't tell me who it is. He just plays me this song. I said, wow, it's great. Who is it? And then tells me it's John Lennon. So I had no idea what was coming next. And he said, well, he's going to do one radio interview. That's it. And we want you to do the interview, produce it, get it out to all the stations. That will be it. He's not doing anything else. So it took me about 1/10 of a second to say, just tell me when, where. And he says, well, you'll be contacted. And in the interim, RKO was shutting down on the West Coast, and I came back to San Francisco. Bill Gavin had offered me a position there, and I was still doing some stuff part-time at KFRC. So I came back to San Francisco in October and never heard anything more about any of this. And then around sometime in November, somebody at Gavin got a call. When somebody answers the phone, and it was Yoko. Not an assistant, not a secretary, no one else. Yoko was on the phone. And immediately they thought, well, who is this? This must be some kind of a gag. Yeah, sure, Yoko Ono. Just go back and tell them. And she's, I get this word. I pick up the phone, and sure enough, there she is and we try to figure out a date to do this interview. She goes, I understand you're going to be the person doing the interview. When would you like to do it? And we worked out a couple of different dates, and we settled on Monday, December the 8th. And I flew out of San Francisco the day before, parked at the airport, met our crew. Hummel and I, Ron and I flew together, and he was coming from the East Bay, so we met in New York. Laurie Kay, our scriptwriter, was there, and off we went the next day to see John and Yoko. They were doing a photo shoot, the very famous Annie Leibovitz photo shoot in the morning, and our interview was scheduled for the afternoon. And we started with Yoko because John hadn't I think nobody had told him that the interview was going. So he showed up about 10 minutes later and jumps into the room, and within a matter of a few minutes, it was so comfortable just being there in this incredible room that we had, with clouds painted on the ceiling and these rugs that they had. And you take your shoes off when you go into this as Japanese custom. So Yoko has everybody take their shoes off, which immediately kind of makes you feel at ease anyway. And we started, the tape was rolling, and we went on for, it was about 3.5 hours. And finished this incredible interview. He was open about talking about, it was really, the focus was really in that last 5 years, what he'd been doing, how this whole project came about. And of course we talked about the Beatles. It comes up in conversation. Impossible not to have that. And then we walked outside, waiting for our car to go to the airport, to go right back to San Francisco, when someone comes across the street. It turned out to be, but we don't like to use his name, but I guess we'll have to. It's Mark Chapman. He was there. So he comes over, talked to Ron, said something about an interview. And then there was only a couple of people there. It was no one around. And John was going to a studio with Yoko, and his car hadn't shown up. So he comes outside, and where are you guys headed? I said, we're going to the airport. You need a ride? Oh, that'd be great. So jumps in the car with us, and we take a ride over to this
record plant.
Yeah, yes, over. I believe it was. Was that it? I can't remember where the heck we were. I know it was a studio. That's right. Jack Douglas was there. It was a studio that he was being dropped off at. So, and he was there. The conversation in the car was one of those. I wish we had recorded that, because it was tremendous. I mean, we were talking about Paul. He was talking about we had our music tastes, because I said, this is such an Elvis. I mean, starting over when you hear it is really like an Elvis kind of like, oh. And he goes, that's the music he grew up with. He says, Little Richard, and he starts singing Long Tall Sally and Jerry Lee Lewis, and it was just fantastic. But it's always a memory that I'll cherish. I just wish we had it, recorded to share with everyone. And that was it. We dropped him off, raced to the airport, got on a plane, which we wouldn't have made this plane in today's security, because there was no security then. It's hard to believe. I tell my kids, yeah, you just go to an airport, you look at a gate, and you go to a plane. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. But now it's now it's like a long ordeal, because we had all kinds of equipment that is much bigger than the stuff that they use now to get through security. We barely made it. They were almost closing the door on the plane as we got there without just going to the gate. So we would have been in New York when this had happened. But as it turned out, we made the flight, got off the plane. No one in San Francisco had heard anything. It's not like the days of today's cell phones, and people can text everyone, what's going on. The whole airport would be buzzing. Nobody was saying anything. So we just said what a great interview. We had this great buzz of what a tremendous day it was. And get in the car, turn on KFRC, and hear Bill Lee playing Beatles songs, which at that time of night for KFRC, if you know what Bill was doing, it was like we were playing, Gap Band. We were, all kinds of stuff. We weren't playing the Beatles at that time of night. So I thought something was up. I said, this is strange. And then I hear some other stations playing Beatles songs, go back to hear Bill, and he does the announcement of what had happened. So you go from being, about as high as you could possibly be in an incredible day to about as low as you can be in a matter of seconds. It was one of those moments.
And
It's even 30 years later, it still hits you hard. And even hearing that music, as much as I love that album, Double Fantasy, hearing those songs brings it all back.
This is supposed to be about you, but I'll throw in, I didn't buy that album until maybe a year or so ago because I couldn't. I just couldn't. It's one of the
Really?
best. It's a wonderful album. It's tremendous.
It is great.
And I'm an addict. I mean, I've got everything he's ever recorded,
Yeah.
but I couldn't buy that because of that. But,
Well, even seeing
Yeah.
Mr. Holland's Opus,
yeah.
where you hear because a lot of that John Lennon, and you're hearing "Beautiful Boy" and hearing that it just
Oh,
like
God.
tugs at the heartstrings. You're
Don't
going,
start.
oh my gosh! I mean, the movie's emotional enough,
Yeah,
and then you add that with the music.
Beautiful Boy with my kids, it's like the same thing.
Yeah.
We strayed off of you, but at this point it's 1980. RKO's winding down with
Right.
the radio station ownership and everything else, and you've got Gavin in your. Is that part of what you're?
Yeah,
doing?
yeah. Gavin, well, RKO was in business, but they just shut down the West Coast. They had moved everything to the East Coast, and someone there was running the show. So, but at some point they were going to sell the company. There were some legal issues. Had to sell the company. General Tire issues and things that didn't involve radio, but nevertheless we were taking the brunt of that. So, so I was doing Gavin. I was there as the top 40 editor, working with Ron Fell, the Zimmerman brothers, a lot of the, Elma Greer, of course, and Bill was still part of the organization. He was still coming in, not all the time, but he came in quite often. So while I was there, Jerry Cagle came in as the program director at KFRC and brought me in. He said, "Can you fill in here? Can you fill in there?" Pretty soon he said, "Listen, could you do 9 to noon and still be at Gavin?" I said, "Well, I think I could work that out." So I talked to the people at Gavin. They said, "Well, if you can do everything within that period of time, I mean, you may have to work, some hours at night to fit it all in." I said, "I can do that. It's not, this is something I love. It's not that difficult." So that's what I did. I did 9 to noon. Got off the air, raced across from Bush Street over to the Embarcadero where the Gavin office was, and that worked for quite a number of years. And when Jerry left, I continued on doing the 9 to noon shift. We made a few programming changes. Mike Phillips became the program director, and when Mike left, they changed. Pat Norman had moved. Our general manager moved to Los Angeles, and the new general manager, Jim Smith, offered me the job as a program director. He says, "Could you do that?" So here I am I'm at Gavin at the same time, programming the station. So I had a lot of help from a lot of great people, and that's the only way you could make it happen. Jack Silver was one of them. He was my assistant PD, and we kept it going. We kept that format going, top 40, all the way right to the flip to Magic 61, and which I continued on there for another year. But I really felt that they needed someone full time, because I was back and forth between Gavin and KFRC. So for that when changing formats, it's a big job. And Harry Valentine came over. I was definitely, he was one of those names that I had passed along to a new general manager at the time. So Pat McNally became general manager then. I said, this is the guy. I think he'll be great for you, and you need someone here that's going to really direct the station. And it turned out to be a big success, but a major change to hear Journey and then hear Glenn Miller. That was a big switch, but it turned out to be the right thing for the station. The ratings certainly proved that. So, and that music, sadly enough, the Magic 61 format, I still think is viable. I think there's an audience. You can do that today. I think those standards, which are impossible, you can't hear them anywhere on the radio.
Right.
There's no,
Exactly right. I want to make sure that I've been covering the nuts and bolts and the point A to point B to point C. What are we missing here? What are we?
Well, I went to the music. I went to the music bit. I did leave Gavin. We didn't cover that. I did something I've always wanted to do.
Some dirt and some filth and stuff like that.
What I wanted to mention was the Lennon story, because when we knew that you were going to New York and we're going to interview John Lennon, Ron Hummel, whom I work with. Ron Hummel taught me radio production. He's the production guy. I walked into KFRC as an engineer, but it was like, oh, now you have to edit tape. And I edit tape? I don't know how to edit tape. I fix transmitters, but I can't edit tape. So what I did was I spent time with him. Well, when the opportunity came along, Ron was like, oh, wow, we're going to New York. And of course, everybody was thrilled and happy. And that night, what happened with us was I had the tube on watching something, and then my wife, Cindy, said, dinner's ready. Okay, so we sat down, we had dinner, and then afterwards I said, I'm going to go back to the office and do some work. I have a home office. And she said, well, I'm going to go turn the TV on, see what's going on. So she goes and turns the television on. I go into the office, and about 30 seconds later, she comes running back in, slams the door open, and says, John Lennon's been assassinated. And you know what the first thing that ran through my mind? The first thing that ran through my mind was, my God, there's been a bomb and my friends are dead. The first thing that ran through my mind, I thought of you and Ron and Lori, and I thought, my Lord, please. And of course, it was a tragedy of the large degree anyway, but the fact that you guys were okay, at least if nothing else, as soon as I was assured that you guys, because I didn't know you'd flown back. Of course, Ron, later on that week when I saw him, he told me the story. He got off the plane, he got home, and then he got called by, was it Lori or Joe or somebody? I think Joe and Arani called him.
Could be.
I think Joe and Arani called him and said what had happened, and he went, you're flipping kidding. He didn't believe it because he didn't see the paper, didn't know. He had no idea. But that was the first thing that ran through my mind, and that scared me as much as anything else. I'm glad it wasn't the case, my friend. I assure you.
Well, especially with the fact that here's Mark David Chapman right there talking to Ron.
Right there talking to Ron.
I mean, if he was really that far, off.
Scary.
Yeah, he obviously was. It could have easily been, that situation. Luckily, that wasn't the case. I kid you not,
and of course Cindy was
wow,
the same
what a story.
Way. It was like she said, do you think they're all right? And I said, oh, my Lord, I hope so. I mean, this was like, this would have really made it a lot worse. Anyway, true story, yeah. And Tommy Saunders is busy trying to make us laugh in here.
Of course. But it's like,
anyway,
so we used to do.
I don't think I ever did tell you that story.
No, you never did, Paul. No, you never did. But I will tell you, that that same night, I mean, we're in New York time. So Mike Colgan, still at KCBS, lived a few doors away, and comes down, he gets a phone call. I just get to my house. About 15 minutes later, there's Mike Colgan. At the door, there's a recorder. Cagle called. We got to get some tape. You got to come down to the station. So I said, well, I'm going to jump in the shower. At least I'll have that. Here we are. New York time now. It's like 1 in the morning or like 10 o'clock in San Francisco. Well, there was no sleep that night. I was at the station, and then at 4 a.m., Channel 7, KGO, which was over on Golden Gate at that time, went over there to get ready for Good Morning America. Had we still been in New York, it would have been in the studios there, but this was San Francisco, so we went from that to back to the Gavin office in the Embarcadero, where everyone was, the Chronicle, the Examiner, the Mercury News, every reporter in a conference room. And then we had a radio special that we thought we were going to take weeks to produce, that we had days to produce, because they wanted it out that following weekend.
Turn it around quickly.
Turn it around. They bought a bunch of TV time and had me jump on, do a spot for like 30 seconds just to invite people to listen. It would be, this was it.
And they sold spots. RKO sold.
They did sell. Yeah, it was. Well, the initial interview was going to be for the RKO radio network, so they figured this was,
the money-making venture.
Yeah, that's.
I just remember those disclaimers that you, I think it was your voice on there where it said, that you're going to hear advertising during this.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not, that was, if you're going to complain about it, complain to RKO General.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if I did that or somewhere. I think I probably did. I can't remember. I think I did?
Yeah.
Oh, it's hard to remember all these things, but you're right. That's pretty much it. But But just the rest of the career. So I stayed at Gavin until 1998, and then got an offer to do something. And I always thought about this and wanted to do it. I figured, well, I've been on the air, been in programming, been on the radio trade thing. The one thing I hadn't done was be on the other side in the record industry. And I had a great offer to be the vice president of promotion without moving to L.A. or New York. I could do it based out of the Bay Area. I said, this is hard to beat this one. Although I would spend a lot of time on the road. My job was kind of like being that roving guy and going to see radio all over the country for Island Records. And I did a similar job a few years later for Capitol as a vice president of promotion there. So it was great. It was a great experience. Great to be with these groups. I stayed with EMI for a while, and I was with EMI until KFRC offered me the position to come back to 106.9 with the lovely Celeste Perry. And
this is on the
yes, and with a great team of people, Tim Jordan, and a great crew, and we had a lot of fun. I wish it was still there. We could continue on. So,
are you willing to venture why it didn't work, or is that something you should
there's a lot of different issues, and I do think had we, first of all, one of the things I don't think we had quite the time that is necessary to build a. I would probably say that among anything else, we just needed more time, and there were a lot of things that happened, the economy, and a lot of things that made that difficult at the time.
You look at the numbers now, though, and you look at what Johnny K's doing with KFRC, and you can look at what WCBS is doing with
all over the
classic
country.
Hits and things like
you
that.
could go right down the list.
Big
Big markets like the Philadelphias, the New Yorks, and the medium large markets where they didn't have any stations doing this. Milwaukee is now on with an oldie station. They call it oldies. Portland, huge. I mean, all these markets are very, very successful. So I do think that they're,
It seems like a brand name is involved in the, with KFRC, which is a legacy radio station, WCBS.
Yes.
But you've got KFRC here, which is as good a brand name as you're going to find.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like it.
Well, I mean, it's we had to have the music, and we had a new frequency as well. So that does take people to
scratch as brand new radio.
Makes people have to find you.
So on top of everything else, the travel, the radio, everything else, working the different jobs, the career, promotions and everything else, you still manage to raise a family.
Yes.
Hold it all together.
That's,
why you, why nobody else?
Yeah, well, I give credit. I don't take any credit for that. That goes to Debbie, my right hand, who I did meet at the Big 610. At KFRC, Paul remembers. Debbie was in the sales department,
right?
And she had no clue. She'd see me running around, and early on, one of the funniest stories is that she thought I was answering the phones for the request line. Thought I was a request line guy. No, that's Dave Sholin. He's the music director, and he's on the air. That guy? Oh yeah. So we went out to our very first date. On Bush Street. How appropriate. I mean, it was the boarding house to see Crystal Gale. And it was almost like a blind date. Even though we knew each other, it wasn't blind. It was put together by one of the salespeople. And he said, boy, Debbie? I said, oh, I've been noticing her in the hallways. I said, Debbie. I couldn't pronounce her last name. It's Geweke, which if you're in the Valley, you know the name Giveke because their family's in the car dealerships. Yeah, which I didn't know. And what is that? Geweke? How do you pronounce that name? No, it's Debbie Giveke. Oh, okay. And so we went out, for that night to see Crystal Gale, and from then we have been together since 1977. Yeah, and we've got 3 great kids.
And one lousy one? Or
three? No, only a 3. And there may be another one out there, but they only have 3, and they're great. Andrew and Sam he's a broadcaster that wants to go into sports broadcasting. I try to talk him out of it. He won't listen.
You've also influenced the careers of some other people along the way, and we can name Rennell and
Rennell. Oh my gosh, yeah, Rennell was just just being. It's one of those things, right place, right time. And she was in our public affairs department, and you just watch Renelle just interact with people, and you'd say to yourself, and Jim Smith was our general manager, and we would sit in the room going, boy, she's like a natural. She should be on the radio. So we made that, made that deal and said, would you like to come in and we'll teach you how to do all this stuff, but just be yourself. Just imagine you're just hanging out with your friends, you're having a night, and forget all the other stuff and just be you. And she took to it immediately, and we know what has happened to her career. She's just tremendous. So it's just that's one of the great things about being in this business, is to be able to have people like that, bring them up through the ranks and see what they can do. Unfortunately, it's tougher to do these days. There aren't as many situations where people can get that start. Certainly in a large market, but used to be able to go out to those those little radio stations out and find positions, and now sadly there's not many people in the building. So
those farm teams out in the valley and bring them up through the farm system.
Yeah, you remember the KSTNs and KJoys, and there are still stations doing that. There just are fewer positions, so it's tougher to break through. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but we had a number of interns. Even in this last run at KFRC, we had a number of interns come in, great kids, and so excited about the business. So I still have faith that there's enough people out there that really do love it, and you try to inspire them enough and give them a few pointers to say, listen, you're on the right track, just do this, this, and this, you'll make it. And I do think there's a great future in the business. Maybe not for as many people, but there will be positions for those who really are passionate about it.